Okay. Okay, folks, it's 6 o'clock. Good evening and welcome to this webinar slash panel discussion on the future of work and its implications for women. The Women and Gender Equality Commission, as most of you should know by now, has been in existence since 2010, and it's a constitutional commission. And that means that we report to Parliament, and we came about as a result of constitutional reform, which felt that our human rights mechanisms needed to be strengthened. So to do that, they formed 4 commissions. Um, and those commissions are the Women and Gender Equality Commission, the Rights of the Child Commission, the Indigenous Peoples Commission, and the Ethnic Relations Commission. And above those commissions will sit, or should sit, the Human Rights Commission. So for the Women and Gender Equality Commission, we focus mainly on issues related to women and the achievement of gender equality. And part of that is to have discussions like we're going to have this evening on things that affect women and how we can work towards putting things in place to achieve gender parity. So this evening's topic is we're dealing again with the future of work, and we have with us this evening 4 presenters, and I'm happy to see that everybody's on, and I will call on them in the following order. We'll have Dr. Paulette Henry from the University of Ghana, and then we'll speak with Anije, Lambert, and Nadine Gilbert. And then we'll follow that up with, I think it's Dianna Glasgow. She's also from the University of Ghana, and she's in the economics department. Anije and Nadine come to us from the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, and these are 2 young women who will speak to us from the private sector side of things. And they have also engaged in what I would term sort of the new work that's going to inform us going forward. So for my little introduction, I have a quote, and I wanted to say it because I think it resonates with us. And it says that concerted and creative new solutions are needed to enable women to seize opportunities in the automation age, because without them, women will fall further behind in the world of work. And the question I have is, with the pandemic, with the occurrence of the pandemic, will we see an increased representation of women in the workforce? Are we going to continue with having flexible working hours? Are there going to be more holistic opportunities for growth and gender equality in the world of work? And will the new normal empower women in the workforce? And will it help them divide their time seamlessly between home and work? So I'll allow our panelists to flesh out some of these ideas a bit more. And I hope you'll enjoy it. And I hope that you will engage and ask sufficient questions to keep them on their toes. As I said, our first presenter will be Dr. Paulette Henry. She is a social worker by training. She's also one of the Commonwealth's wise women of the world, and we're very proud that she has been that honor. She's also worked extensively with the commission. In fact, she's helped us to put together our strategic plan, which will be our second strategic plan. We'll be launching that later on this year. So Dr. Henry, over to you.
Good afternoon, Renata and sisters from the Women and Gender Equality Commission. I consider us family by now. We've had years of togetherness, and it's indeed a pleasure, Madam Chandrapal, who was, I always repeat, was instrumental in my moving from the Probation and Family Welfare organization under her ministry when she was just stepping into the role as minister. I remember her asking me at that time, when I asked for the transfer, to be transferred, she asked me, would you be in a position to help women? And I'll never forget that. And I always remind her, I don't think she remembers how much she has influenced and impacted my own life as a young woman at the time who wanted and sought mobility. She made an impression, and I feel always that it's my responsibility to pass the baton. So again, I say publicly to you, Honorable Miss Indra Chandrapal, thank you so much for the influence that you have made on my own experiences as a woman.
Thank you
So
very much,
Renata,
Paulette.
you're welcome. Renata, as I indicated, I'm going to be taking off my camera and continue the conversation because I see this as a conversation that we need to have. A conversation as we talk about what does the future hold for us. This future that is so dynamic, so ever changing, so a little bit uncertain, but definitely exciting. But what does it mean for us? What does it mean for women and girls? I want to share with you a little bit that I got from one of the ILO report, which says 20 years after Beijing. And in that report, they said that there has been progress. There are fewer women in vulnerable employment. More women are in leadership positions. More women have access to maternity protection. The pay gap is narrowing. However, while the percentages are moving in the right direction, they are moving not fast enough. Though women represent half of the world's population, there is a way to go until women enjoy the same benefits and rights as men. And that is a powerful message that is being shared with us because we can see that same story here in Guyana. We know that there is movement. We know that things are happening. But is it happening fast enough? And how are women going to be benefiting? Particularly now that a lot of our policy proposals, a lot of our policy initiatives are gender blind, and sometimes not enough focuses on separating us out of the equation. And we must consider that as we look at the sustainable development goals. So our women are facing more challenges than our male counterparts when it comes to labor participation and when it comes to access to decent jobs and decent pays. So there is a gap, and there are several reports that speak to that gap. I think one of the major challenges that we see when you look at most of the reports that talk about what the future of women look like include a long discourse on technology and how technology is displacing jobs. We have seen displacement too in terms of COVID and other conditions that have affected us. The dynamic is changing, the demographics are changing, digitalization is happening rapidly. Where are women located in the workforce? And I hope that our other colleagues and other panelists who I forgot to include in my acknowledgements, please forgive me, panelists. Here, I want to acknowledge you and the conversation that we are all going to contribute to, but to use this opportunity to move forward to say that with technology and the whole digital sphere that we are all located in, these are going to have implications for gender equality and for women, and particularly women's empowerment. There is a resource that has been shared on Latin America and the Caribbean coming out of the OECD. And what that is pointing to is the gender disparity in which where women and men are located. And we are largely located in those wholesale and retail sector, those home related hospitality services, education, and so on, right? And those are the services where they are lower paid, and where if things are to go under, when people cannot afford hospitality, when people cannot afford education, or when people cannot afford certain things in certain sectors, those are the sectors that are going to go under. And when those sectors go under, that is when women are affected, because men are in construction, men are in storage and transportation, more men are in the administrative, the higher end and leadership positions. Women are in health and social services. Men are in agriculture, forestry, more men are there than women. When you look at those percentages, a higher number of men are in those sectors that seem to have a longer life, and seem, even when they are affected, are not as badly affected as where women are located. So women are definitely going to be affected, and we have to think of what that effect means for us. What does that effect means for the law when a woman loses her job? What that means for her family? We have to think of where our women are located in the manufacturing and clerical sector. One of the IMF discussion papers talked about this, right? And it says that more than 11% of the women in the OECD and countries tend to perform a more routine tasks compared to 9% of that male workforce. Good, so it means that more than 180 million jobs, female jobs, when you think about the global story, are at high risk of displacement globally. Good. So those are the challenges, those are the risks that women will face, the risk that technological advances will have a greater negative impact on women than men is aggravated by the current lack of women in STEM jobs, as well as the low percentage of girls and women who are also training in STEM fields. And we see that. Good. And when a woman, I just want to reiterate, as Renata indicated, I am coming from a social science background. I want to reiterate that when a woman loses a job, when a woman is negatively impacted, it places her in that higher risk and vulnerable group for so many other things, right? Because she is a woman looks after a family, and we have in our context quite a high number of single women, and not all of them are well positioned. We've had studies done on where those women, some of those women in Guyana, are placed in which sectors, and how their vulnerability through loss of income affects them. So these are things that places women at risk in terms of the workforce, and we have to address it. So what do we need to do? How can you, the Women and Gender Equality Commission, what's our role? What's our role in terms of influencing policies for women and girls? What's our role in terms of the education sector like UG in talking to women and girls? What's the role for teacher education and all the other sectors in terms of talking to our women and girls as they prepare for the future, a future that is rapidly changing? Admittedly, everyone cannot or will not get into the sciences and the technology, but definitely because of the changing dynamic in terms of technology and the digital world that we now occupy, we have to look at reskilling and upskilling and be ready for that. And those are the things that we have to say to our women and girls. We need to encourage more women and girls definitely to enter into the STEM fields. I know for a fact that the commission sponsor at least one student in technology, and that's a good thing because it also shows that you are proactive as it relates to what needs to happen for women and girls. So we definitely need to be intentional in our actions, be intentional in our efforts to retrain and to upskill our women and our girls for the future. Because if they do not have the new skills that are required, then we have a problem. And we have a problem that as a country, we will have to address when they're displaced. We see the escalating violence in our society. And financial violence, we see the physical, we see the manifestation and the outpouring of that violence, but sometimes we don't see the other aspects, the emotional and those other elements of violence and harm that comes to our women and girls when they are not financially stable, or when their background is not financially sound, when they cannot leave abusive relationships and the like. And even when they are, there is a problem. So we need to work on those skill set, and we need to work on it very early so that the child understands from an early age and stage what is required, how to be an assertive financial leader and manager, so that so that she gets into the sector that is best suited to manage her life and livelihood. Good, so we have to promote continuing education in technology, both in the basic and advanced skills, so that our women and girls have the skill set for this new age, for the future. We can no longer wait for it to happen. We have to be very intentional. We have to be very proactive. Today, just before joining this session here, the University of Guyana, through our Faculty of Education, launched a new element of teacher education program, which is going to make sure that more and more teachers are trained across the country and in every region, and there is no waiting on a turn to get trained. And what does that teacher training mean? I heard our Vice Chancellor speak to the issue of advanced teaching technology at an early stage in schools, in the primary schools, adding it to the curricula. And I see that as one of the proactive steps in terms of what is needed and what is required. So we have to start talking the language more and more to our girls very early, so that when they grow up, they are not like their parents. They're shifting pathways in terms of their occupations and what they are looking to get. So we have to also look at the social protection infrastructure to make sure that those who are in remote locations, as I said earlier, can have the access to education and have the kind of digital infrastructure to make sure that they benefit from the skills. And I see the commission in a very critical role as a pushing policies to make sure that this happens. And based on what I saw this afternoon at the launch between the Ministry of Education, the Teacher Education, and the University of Guyana, it definitely is a very forward-thinking strategy to see the impetus towards upskilling. But we need to make sure that we talk the language, and that language and message is understood by families and by girls particularly, and by mothers, by women that they need to get these additional skill set to make them more marketable, because the dynamic is changing, the demographic is changing, the workforce is changing. We also need to make sure that there are quality jobs in the care, education, and health sectors, so that they can be better benefits and provide economic stability. Because these are largely the sectors that women are in. We are the carers. We are largely placed and groomed and nurtured into that bracket. And even though women are stepping outside of those boundaries, we still continue to be placed there. Some of us will remain there. And if we are remaining there, then it means that we have to look at the quality packages that are offered to us. And so there has to be some level of advocacy to make sure that we benefit properly if we are going to be staying there as carers and as nurturers, so that we can have the financial stability that is required. Additionally, there are some institutions that are natural leaders that will have to help with leading the change. I cannot overemphasize the role of the commission, but I also want to say that each and every one of us are leaders in our own right. And we have got to build that cadre of leadership that is required to give voice to what is required as we look to see what the girl child would look like. This is a time of, I would say, if we don't harness it, a time of crisis. But it could be a time of opportunity that we can turn around if we take the time to stop and lobby, stop and speak to the policymakers, stop and engage others, make sure that our programming are changing to make and ensure that that girl child and that woman understands what this means if they do not upskill themselves, if they do not take advantage of opportunities when they are presented, or to also make sure that communities are equipped with the kind of infrastructure, the kind of social and digital infrastructure that allows them the opportunities to benefit from possibly unpaid the child care work that they do. You know, some women, one of my colleagues was sharing with me that she was having a session, and in that class, a young mother had her child sitting on her lap because she had no daycare, but fortunately she was able to join online. But when she started to talk about some of her experiences, she broke because her financial circumstances were difficult, her social support circumstances were difficult, but she was still forging ahead. And we need to find ways of addressing the support needs that our women and girls will have, because the burden of care, as we know, is largely placed on our women and girls. And we have to find ways of addressing that. Elder care, parenting, child care, all of those things. We need, everything does not require money, but we have to come up with innovative ways to make sure that the burden of care is shared, if not by male partners. Society, the economic aspect of that has to be considered in order to support the work of our women, so that they can get to do what is needed to be done. Right? So I wanted to share those initial thoughts and allow us to have a further conversation going forward. Thank you very much, Renata.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry. Certainly, you have given us some food for thought. 180 million jobs at risk. That's some sobering statistics. So, the biggest lesson we've learned this during the pandemic is that we are not tied to a location to get our work done, or to run our companies. And organizations have been able to trust their employees to provide a more output-based evaluation rather than a FaceTime-based one. This is particularly true for the private sector. So I remember when the pandemic started and ministries and government agencies basically had to be forced to shut down. Business continuity was definitely threatened. Uh, so one would hope that by 2022, certainly all organizations have put in place plans for business continuity so that things like pandemics don't are not causing such a disruption as it did in the beginning and at the beginning of 2020. Our next presenter is going to be Nadine Gilbert-Rambaran. She is a lawyer and she also specializes in compliance related work. And in the new dynamic, I guess, that exists in Guyana, compliance is a really big thing, particularly for the oil and gas industries. Certainly, the oil and gas industry is pushing us to pull up our socks to ensure that we have manuals, that we document things, that we really essentially we become ISO compliant. So I'm looking forward to Nadine's take on the future of work in Guyana. Thank you. 10 minutes.
Hi, good evening, everyone. And I just want to thank Dr. Henry as well for sharing all of the information that is shared. I hope this is okay, but I'm going to bounce discussion off of Anije as well, who is co-attending with me from the private sector side of things. I mean, when we talk trends post the pandemic in particular, and particularly from a private sector side, I feel like that is such a heavy and loaded thing to address because if we're to talk about that across classes for women in particular, those trends or those changes, they do not have the same outcomes for everyone. So, I mean, of course, one of the most prevalent trends is developing structures within entities that facilitate hybrid workspaces, or sometimes now even totally virtual workspaces. And I mean, for the working class woman, that might not look as positive as it would look for a middle class working woman. It might mean that she's stuck at home with her children and not knowing what to do with them, may not be as educated as another class of woman, and know what to do with them where education is concerned, or how to take care of them. A lot of them too are frontline workers who are required to be out of the house and not have that opportunity to enjoy that trend of working virtually. And so it may mean for a lot of working class women to leaving their children unattended, right? But on the other hand, too, there are positive outcomes, and one of the key ones I think that I've seen from the private sector side is boost in productivity and an extra focus on processes and productivity in particular, which is good, but also too can be at the risk of maybe changing the way things are done too much. Uh, you know, uh, we might forget. It becomes so easy to work in a virtual space that we start or tend to ignore things like work-life balance. So it is a delicate balance. Miss Dr. I'm sorry, what was your name? That spoke previously talked about upskilling and reskilling, which I think is very important considering that a large percentage of the workforce here in Ghana is actually women, about 40.8, if I'm not mistaken, percent of the workforce in Ghana is women. So upskilling and reskilling, very important, having a focus on tech to avoid that displacement that we're seeing happening, not just here, but globally, means that it's very important to do that upskilling and reskilling. Anije, I don't know if you want to jump in at this point too to talk about trends. Anije is someone who does a lot of research where these things are concerned. So I would invite her to jump in at this point, share some thoughts as well.
Thank you, Nadine. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be present among such prestigious women, and I am really happy to just offer my 2 cents to the conversation. As Nadine would have mentioned, we have been doing a lot of on-the-ground research. We have been talking with a lot of people, a lot of women in particular, when it comes to what's happening and how things have changed. What we've realized that there has been disruptions after the pandemic, both negative and also positive. To kind of touch on some of the positive trends that we've been seeing is that we've seen a lot of women begin to take up micro businesses, even if it's on the side, where they can bring in an extra dollar. We've seen also that there has been a surge in more self-awareness. And I think if we were to look at situations, as they call it, the Great Resignation, we see a lot of younger individuals sitting, pondering, thinking about what they would like to do in the future, shifting jobs that they believe offers more purpose for them, as well as more opportunities, and to maybe climb the corporate ladder. But again, the points that Dr. Henry and Nadine brought up, like, we have to recognize that it's a scale and we have to learn to balance it. So there are some positives, such as we are able to, one, be at home. We get to have our baby on our lap and kiss them and hug them throughout the day and spend time with them. But that also means that we have to then divide our attention. And they always say women are awesome multitaskers, but in reality, sometimes we have to write a report. Sometimes we are students, and when we have to deal with a child or then take on the role of a teacher, which we've seen happen in the past 2 years, we realize that there is some need to have separation. In once, of course, some women have mastered it and some others haven't. I remember a couple months ago, last year, August in particular, there was this particular quote from a paper that I was reading from Edinburgh Business School. And if I may, the quote said, "In all countries, and regardless of working status, the majority of the responsibility for domestic life usually falls on women. While this does not deter many women from economic participation, the resultant lack of time and energy may impact on their desire to take on greater responsibility in the workplace." We did a study just a couple months ago. We are not per se at liberty to share direct statistics on our findings, but what I can say from observation, we've seen that a lot of women who enter the entrepreneurial landscape enters it on the context because they believe it's their opportunity to be the owners of their time. And it was quite interesting to observe that many people, many women, they decide that this is my way out. This is the way in whereby I get to decide how I spend my time. I get to decide when I could pick up my kids. I don't always have to work 9 to 5. And it's something, and Dr. Henry mentions, we are, a lot of times we are brought up with the context that as women, we have to take on the role of the nurturer in the home. And in some cases, we do battle against that. So I shared that quote on social media just to kind of hear some feedback of what women had to say. A lot of times in the business environment, whenever it came to female participation, the statements are, oh, we have calls, we have open calls, but when we call, women don't come. And I was like, they don't come because they have so much to do. I remember one time being, we were invited as PSC and the Chamber of Commerce. We were invited to meet with some dignitaries. I was the only woman who showed up. I was the only woman who showed up, and I wondered why. But then when I looked at the list of invitees, I was also the only woman without a child and without a partner. So a lot of times when it comes to women, we need to be intentional. When it comes to women's participation, we as a unit, both male and females, need to come together and be like, we understand what you've been going through. We understand that it's tiring. And I quote one of the not participants, but one of the respondents to the post was, I have personally experienced this. I have turned down several engagements and opportunities because one, I is tired. And two, the hassle of making childcare and home care arrangements is tedious. And these are coming from not only women. This particular post came from a woman in a moderate, mid to high economic bracket. What are the women in the lower economic brackets facing? Like, these are the questions that we need to ask. These are the questions we need to ponder on. Now, the chamber, the private sector, we are committed to ensuring that women have such levels of encouragement. And across the board, there are a lot of very gendered specific programs that are developed for training and the upskilling of women across the board when it comes to managing finances, when it comes to managing resources, when it comes to managing supply and logistics. So, as Dr. Henry said, and Nadine said, we do have to realize that there's a human element, especially when it comes to our women. And we need to be intentional, which is something I'm happy that we have organizations, both public and private sectors, are doing. And we need to have more conversations like these so we could talk about and discuss and merging of the great minds on what are some way forwards, what are some practical, kind, humanistic ways forward in regards to dealing with women, their participation in entrepreneurship, as well as in the workforce as employees.
Anije, you brought out some very important points there, particularly that a lot of these trends that we've been talking about, particularly having the hybrid workspaces or the virtual workspaces, in particular benefit women who are mothers. And I think that's very important to note because on the other hand, some negatives have been identified about those trends, that being us, losing perhaps morale in the workplace, or losing our humanness and losing the ability to have good workplace relationships, so to speak, and just being laser focused on the productivity aspect of it. But indeed, you made a very important point. These are things that benefit women who are mothers. And I think that from a legal perspective or a regulatory perspective, um, I personally I would use regulation to encourage entities, private entities, to craft workplace policies that address these trends in such a way that it is beneficial to women, particularly women who are, in a particular situation who need to have that option there, and solidify it somehow or the other. Because I do think that these trends, there's something that we're still all trying to figure out how best it works for us. I mean, I don't know what your experience as a business owner is, but at least that's my experience, that I'm still trying to figure out how that works for me and my company. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, like because my staff, we have a lot of part-time staff that, that works with us. And again, I don't know how, like, women are so talented and strong. I have a great support system. I have my mom, I have people that I could count on. I have good friends. I have access to resources. I have access to therapy. So these are the small, tiny things that in some cases, because of certain economic groups, they're not able to access as easily. We need to be really intentional about our program development and making sure that things are distributed through a manner of equity. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, good jobs, guys. Good job. So Anije, for those of you who don't know, she heads up a consulting firm that really does a lot of research in Guyana. And she's one of those people that started really young. She started a company at 19. So kudos to you. And certainly she provides us the data to make the decisions that we have to make. And certainly can thank you guys for your presentation. One of the things that the pandemic also brought to the fore is the vulnerability of informal employment. And a lot of us saw that if, we had persons in informal employment, the pandemic came, persons shut down their households. It's like no strangers are coming in, the cleaners can't come in, the gardeners can't come in because, this virus thing, I'm not sure how to handle it. And so those persons became unemployed. And these are some of the real realities of things. If it's well and good to encourage women and girls to get upskilled in technology jobs, but what happens when the technology eliminates your job? They have robots now that clean your houses. They have robots that will do things like do farm work. And so these things are coming on stream very rapidly. The McKinsey Global Institute has a report out entitled "The Future of Women at Work: Transitions in the Age of Automation." And it finds that if women make the transitions, they are on the path to more productive, better paid work. However, if they cannot, they face a growing wage gap and can be further left behind. So some of the things that we need to think about, the age of automation and on the near horizon, artificial intelligence technologies offer new opportunities and avenues for economic advancement. But if women face new challenges overlaid on long established ones, and as Dr. Henry alluded to, 180 jobs are going to be lost based on technology. So one of the things that we really need to do is to think of how we can become better skilled, more mobile, and certainly more tech savvy, and be able to I don't want to say rehome, but certainly find new bits of employment for jobs that are going to be lost through the use of technology. I want to bring in here Dr. I think it's Dr. Dianna Glasgow. She comes to us from the University of Guyana, Department of Economics. And when I approached her about talking tonight, she was very excited about it. And one of the things I want to bring to your attention is that Dr. Glasgow is currently presenting a class at the university. So she's in the middle of a 3-hour class. And through the wonders of technology, she's able to do 2 things at one time. There goes the multitasking of women. So, you know, UG, I must admit, and you have to give UG kudos, they have been able to move a lot of their teaching online, so persons can actually still continue the process of getting an education. And it gives also the lecturers opportunities to do other things, to be more flexible, to be more available for things like this. And I do appreciate it. So Dr. Glasgow, over to you.
Thank you, Renata, and good evening, colleagues. The previous presenters, you have said a lot of what I'm going to say. I want to quickly look at the trends that are shaping the world of work in the short and long term, and look at the implications of these going forward and what it means in terms of how we should respond at the policy level. There are about 4 main factors I want to identify, and I'll bring a bit of an economic vantage point to the discussions. The first is shocks. Shocks in all forms. The COVID-19 pandemic could be characterized as a health-related shock that has affected the economy, but there are other forms of shocks. Every couple of years, we tend to get an economic shock, a housing bubble bursting in the developed world, a housing market crisis, a financial crisis, and this feeds into developing countries such as Guyana. But shocks generally tend to create a lot of economic disruptions that more negatively affect women. And this is because of the disposition of women in the labor market and the fact that they've faced traditional barriers with respect to wage gaps, and the fact that they find themselves mainly in the low skill element of the labor market. So shocks will tend to widen the gap between men and women in the labor force. The current labor force globally, the current labor force participation is about 49% for women and 75% for men. So don't be deceived, there's already a very wide disparity in terms of our participation. And whenever there are shocks, those disparities tend to be further exacerbated. The other presenters have spoken to the issue of digitalization, automation, and the gig or platform economy, which COVID-19 sort of pushed us a bit forward into. More businesses embraced e-commerce. In fact, that became the new norm of conducting business enterprises across the globe. And we weren't left out in Guyana. But the gig economy is a free market system where you have temporary positions being very common. You have a lot of part-time workers and consultancies, right? COVID-19 reinforced that as a pattern in the global market. But that is going to have implications for the world of work for women going forward. The fourth industrial revolution would likely lead to faster growth of jobs in science and technology, which Dean Henry spoke to. But very important for women is that science and technology jobs are likely to be more male dominated. So it means women are going to be further displaced. So what we've seen with COVID-19, and a trend that we're likely to see persistent going forward is digitalization and the gig economy and the rise of non-standard forms of employment, self-employment, temporary work, independent contracting. And I smiled when Anije spoke to the fact that we've seen an upsurge in entrepreneurial activities in Guyana, because this is a trend that we're also seeing globally. But more specific to Guyana, what is going to affect the future of the working environment or the labor market for women here is the changes we are seeing at the macro level in our economy and the demand that is going to bring for new skills. Oil and gas, I'm making reference to more specifically. The growth of that industry, both in upstream and downstream activities, would have implications for women. Of course, women are going to be able to get some jobs, but given traditional structures and how we have pursued educational opportunities, men have tended to play a more significant role in science and technology related jobs. So this is an industry that we anticipate is going to benefit men more than women. But there are other policy initiatives taking place that would impact the structure of our economy. We expect that we're going to use oil and gas resources to push a diversification agenda. We are also already seeing reference rather to advancement of the agricultural sector through a commercialization strategy of agri-food systems, which means large-scale productions. It means women which tend to find themselves mainly in small-scale agro-processing activities are going to be displaced because we have the traditional hurdles of access to finance to really expand into very large-scale enterprises. So it's going to be a change that is going to be male-dominated again. And of course, there are also demographic changes that will affect the market, the labor market. We're seeing immigration, Venezuelans, Trinidadians, and other nationalities coming to Guyana. There's going to be some amount of displacement in the labor force that will affect women. Return migration, we like to say the comebackies, but there are going to be people who are coming back, and they're going to be going after those high-skilled, high-level jobs, and we can expect some degree of displacement going forward. So these are some of the factors that will affect women's participation in the labor force in a more Guyana-specific context. Now, reflecting on some of the changes that I've mentioned, and particularly what we saw with COVID-19, how were women affected? We have spoken a lot to opportunities, and there were opportunities, flexible work arrangements, being better able to balance motherhood and career advancement. But there are also challenges. The gig economy, the platform economy, and the opportunities that bring for flexibility also brings with it greater risks of income insecurity. Women are more like, in the first place, women are already found more substantially in low-skilled jobs. As technology advances and the platform economy advances, women are going to be more likely to be pushed in unemployment. There's also an issue of digital gender gaps, maybe not an issue relevant to Guyana, but in places such as India. Women don't have access to the internet in the same ratio as men do. So we're talking about taking advantage of digital jobs, but there is that digital gap. You need the internet to connect to the digital economy. Women are more likely to face limitations with respect to access to data, and there are also geographic inequities with respect to access to the internet. So there are challenges as well as opportunities. A very important statistic I encountered, the World Economic Forum indicated that men stand to gain 1 job for every 3 jobs lost to technology, while women are expected to gain 1 job for every 5 or more jobs lost. So a man is more likely to be resilient in the labor market, to bounce back, to pursue other opportunities successfully so. But a woman, because of the socio-cultural norms and the traditional challenges that we have faced, women are more likely to be displaced. An important opportunity, or perhaps two, one Anije referred to, is the upsurge in entrepreneurial undertakings of women. This came out of COVID-19, and this is a trend that is likely to persist in the future in the labor market. There has been a growth in women-owned businesses. Anije established that for Guyana, but this has also been taking place in developed countries. Women are trying to take control to achieve that balance in their career advancement and their family pursuits. And so more women are getting into businesses. In fact, to quote an estimate from the United States, over the past 2 decades, the number of women-owned businesses has grown 114% compared to the national growth rate for all businesses. So this is something that is happening, and this is something that we expect that is going to continue in the future. Another important opportunity is the opportunity for authenticity. Traditionally, women pursue jobs, because you needed an income. But one of the things we have seen with COVID is that more women are pursuing authentic jobs that reflect them, jobs that reflect their personalities and their desire to manage their homes as well as careers. The platform economy gives them that opportunity to take better control of their job choices. And this is a trend, again, that we can expect into the future. So over the long term, we expect balance will be an important factor. And I think this is important to shape how business responds strategically to the labor market and how policymakers craft policies. Very important. Balance will continue to be an important factor. COVID created the realization that we don't need, productivity jobs aren't necessarily location bound, right? We could work remotely and do so very productively. So women are going to be more concerned about balance, and it would be very important if the business community responds strategically. The future of work is also going to be very remote, according to a publication by Forbes magazines. And organizations embraced the hybrid approach during COVID-19, and going forward in the future, they're going to continue to embrace that hybrid approach. JP Morgan, just to give you an example, has already adopted an approach where workers can work 2 weeks a month or 2 days a week from home. So it would be in the strategic interests of firms that are looking to drive productivity and take advantage of opportunities to lower costs and be competitive, to tap into the pool of talented women that want to work but are looking for jobs that would allow them that flexibility to manage their homes as well as careers. It would be in the strategic interests of those firms to continue to embrace a hybrid approach and to support remote work. The future of work will also continue to be flexible. Women are more likely to make changes for family. And if as a firm, you want to look for new talents to drive productivity and competitiveness, then you cannot exclude women. But to cater for women, flexibility is very important, because women have the dual responsibility, I would describe it that way, of wanting to take care of their families as well as to continue to push their career development. So in terms of the policy implications, it's very important. Policies cannot be gender blind. If we want to grow our economies, we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, we have to emphasize women, right? We have to centralize in the policy discussions those who are vulnerable, those who are marginalized, and that means looking at the peculiarities and the challenges of women, addressing skills gap based on growth poles in the economy. so that we can find niches within the oil and gas sector, for instance, to ensure that women are able to participate in this new found growth pole of the economy. Looking beyond the immediate future for influences of policy discussion and planning. Right, when we're going to craft policies, we have to be able to look down the line and see what are the changes taking place in the labor market, how are women affected, having long-term tailored interventions to address the gendered segregation of work, which limits women entry into sectors traditionally associated with male capabilities. Policies also need to look at addressing sociocultural norms, ensuring that the education system does not reinforce those stereotypical expectations of women, right? To avoid the traditional inequalities being perpetuated in the labor market. So those are the implications for policy, and I think Anije spoke to it, and this is the last point I'm going to make, and that relates to data gaps. In order for the business community and policymakers to be able to respond to changes in the labor market, we need the data so that we can provide the basis for evidence-based policy making. And it's important that we begin to make the necessary legislative and regulatory changes to ensure that we can obtain the necessary data to always stay ahead of changes in the labor market and anticipate how those are going to affect women and respond accordingly through tailored interventions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glasgow. Very good presentation. I certainly concur and agree with a lot of the points that you made, and I'm sure that all of the presenters feel the same way. What we're going to do now, as is normal with our panel discussions, is that we open the floor for questions and comments. There are a fair bit of people on the call this evening, so I'm going to ask your indulgence to please keep your comments and questions brief and concise, so that allows everyone to get a chance to participate in this conversation. I'd also like you to indicate by raising the hand, whether it's on camera or there's a little button at the bottom of your screen that allows you to raise your hand. Please do that so I can recognize and make sure that we get everybody in the conversation. But before we go jump into the crowd, as it were, I want to invite the chair if she wishes to say something first.
Thank you very much, Renata. I must say the presentations were extremely, so I would say informative, and has given us a lot of food for thought. And two issues came to my mind as the presenters were talking about what they believe are the things that are needed to be done. And it reminds me of the fact that on June 16, we will be celebrating Animal Martyrs. Now, what has this got to do with what we're talking about? And I will tell you that the whole question of creche, daycare for women who are working. How many people know that the Venn Commission that looked into the massacre had said that it was necessary to provide daycare for those women who were working in the fields because they were leaving their kids unattended at home. And therefore, if you wanted productivity, it was necessary for them to be able to have somewhere to have their children. So when they leave work, when they leave home to go to work, they can focus on their work. That is something, it just reinforces the point that daycare is something that we've all talked about, but one has to look into the future to see how that is possible. That's the first issue I want to speak to, and then to remind all of our speakers, in terms of the Sustainable Development Goal 50-50 in 2030, the fact that we're talking about technological development, the digital divide and all of that, do you see that this will help women to get more involved in some of those jobs that we were unable to have in the past. It is something that we need to give thought to as we try to work towards the SDG goal. I do believe we in the Commission have started the discourse on 50-50 some years ago, and at the moment we have scheduled meeting with different government departments to talk to ministers about this, to remind them, because we're just 8 years away from SDG goal. So I just wanted to intervene and say that the presentations were really good, and that I think it augurs well for the discussion that will follow. Thank you very much, Renata.
Thank you, Chair. Hi. Okay, so I see Nicole has her hand up. Long time no see.
Hi, everybody.
So I recognize you.
Yeah, I just wanted to also share that with the whole movement of going online, we don't have laws in place specifically in the Caribbean for how women work online. So like sexual harassment, how do we transfer those sorts of codes online? I know when the region talks about cybersecurity, it's mostly around money and data. They don't have a face, and they of course don't have a female face.
Thank you. So the next person I see, I'm going online with my screen, is Lal Bahadur Singh.
Yes, thank you very much. Is everyone hearing me?
Yep, 10 minutes. I mean, please keep your comments short, right? This is just a reminder.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm the HR director of the Marriott Hotel, and I've been in my experience in the hotel industry for over 20 years now. And I just want to highlight two very important points. And this is something that I've experienced, firsthand with women in the workplace, and that is, and someone mentioned it in the chat just now, is that we need regulation to give women the freedom of access to the workforce at their freedom. So what we're basically saying is that when they come into an environment like with a shift system in place, we need some regulation, and these are very practical things that we need to be done, that stipulates that women can have the choice of their shift. Because at the moment, there isn't any regulation that stipulates that they can make that choice. And ever so often, women come, they do interviews, and it's just that one factor that, is the deciding factor if they get the job or not. And some of them say, you know what, it's a shift work. I'm sorry, I have a small baby. I can't do the job, and they're so fit, everything checks out. They qualify for the job, and just that one thing, deters them from getting the job, right? So that is something of grave concern for me. I would like to see some more regulation that is leaned towards making it much more easier for women to fall into the workplace and at their own convenience with all of the conditions. And somebody else mentioned something regarding maternity, and they should have that choice of extending their time even before having some time off and all of that. Regulations should really be, somebody should lobby for regulations to help in that regard, right? Basically, that's my contribution. There are a lot of points, but the time is limited, and I thank everyone for this opportunity for being part of such a very meaningful forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and your comments are duly noted. The PS from Ministry of Labor was on earlier, and I'm sorry that he doesn't seem to be on at the moment, but he was certainly been the most apt person to respond to your question about regulations. I do believe that it is timely. I think Nicole also mentioned the need for regulations, because even though things have gone on the platform level, the old challenges that exist in the real world, things like sexual harassment, like violence, like persons being unfair with respect to pay and employment transfer onto the platform or the gig economy as well. I want to take one more, and this is going to be from Imani, and then we'll throw it to the presenters. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me, or the questions or a comment. Great presentations thus far. My name is Imani Duncan Price. I'm a consultant with UN Women working on a project with the Spotlight Initiative in Guyana, working with several private sector companies in looking to have them come on as signatories to the Women's Empowerment Principles, which is a framework that UN Women had designed in partnership with a few hundred private sector companies globally about 12 years ago. The reason why I mention this is because in the context of the topic, and a very worthwhile topic, before the pandemic, these principles were putting forward things like flexi time. The principles, although they speak to women, they actually are about gender equality and how do you get to gender equality in the workplace itself, recognizing that there are differences in responsibilities for both men and women. And care speaks to not just children, but care also speaks to parents as well, you know, as some persons are in the sandwich generation in a sense. And so prior to the pandemic, things like flexi time are on the principle speaking about equal rights and benefits for men and women. Things like childcare, whether companies themselves establish childcare facilities within their own entity or provide vouchers to employees to help them offset the costs of childcare, recognizing that there are challenges. Or with principle 4, when it comes to training and meetings, being cognizant that people have responsibilities at home. See, it's not always, if you have a meeting after 6 p.m. or a meeting on a Saturday, you're going to have to plan for some care support to be given, or don't plan it for then, you know? So I wanted to share that because we are actually working with about, Melanie is actually a part of it, not in this company. We're about right now 15 companies. We're looking to expand the number of companies that have taken on these principles as signatories. And what I've found most interesting, and I want to raise this point as hopefully a point that the Commission can take up as well in terms of advocacy, is that of paternity leave. What we found globally is that when men recognize that they have a role to play in care from the get-go, and paternity leave is not the same amount of leave as a woman, because ideas around parental leave now, right? Where you decide who is the primary caregiver, which could be the male, you know, and who is a secondary caregiver. The secondary caregiver has less time, but by having time with the child, in this case, most of the men, they recognize that changing a diaper, feeding a child with a bottle, hushing a child is not the remit only of women, that men too can care. And by starting early in the process of parenting and sharing the responsibilities, gender equality starts at the home, and therefore they become better advocates and understanding how gender equality can be facilitated and should be facilitated in the workplace. We know that in Guyana, you guys are a very progressive company. The government funds the majority of maternity leave for women. But if we could look at how is it, as Guyana is growing and continues to be progressive, that the government could take on paternity leave as well at a lower level of weeks. The companies that we're working with, quite a few of them themselves are doing it. They're actually actioning that policy in their companies. And we're hoping that they can be like forerunners in a sense, as examples of what is possible in Guyana. But it would be great as well if other players can also put it forward, because I think that would also help to shift the cultural expectations as to who is to be the caregiver. I mean, we all can be caregivers to our children, and it makes for better families, stronger children, and it has positive roll-on effects in the workplace as well. So just sharing that with you, and I would love to actually meet with your commission at some point, just to share the principles in more detail, and we can see how we can possibly work together in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Imani, and I'm sure we can work on something. All right. So panelists, would you wish to respond
right now, or can I take one more? Because Melanie is traveling, so I don't want her to lose internet connection.
I think you should take the one more before we go.
Okay. So Melanie, you're on.
Good
Right.
evening, and thank you very much for the invite. For those who may not know me, Melanie Master. I'm with Taranamo, with the Kanuni. And I wanted to make two comments. First, that I absolutely agree with all of the presenters. Gender has to be intentional. I was particularly distressed at a recent workshop to hear from one ministry that no, they're gender blind. And what this translates to in practicality is that there is no budget to enable female participation. And so I find that saying that a ministry especially or a project is gender blind or gender neutral is incredibly negative. I don't know why people think it's a positive thing. Secondly, I'd like to point out that, again, the tourism sector is a sector which has seen, especially over the last decade, an increasing number of women, especially Indigenous women, engaged in it. And if you look at the Rupununi specifically, one of the things I'm incredibly proud of is the fact that you will see that many of the women leading businesses across the region and even more widely within the tourism sector, many businesses are being led by women. And yet, when there are high-level discussions about the development of this industry, when we are talking about policy, and when we are even talking about international engagement regarding investment, there is an abject absence of female representation in the room. And so these are the sort of things that we do have to address. Because how are we to enable female participation in the workforce when we are not even enabling those people who are taking up that mantle to be part of the development of these industries? So those are my two comments.
Thank you. Your points are noted about the absence of women at the decision-making tables, particularly when investments are being discussed. And certainly there's no such thing as being gender blind. It just doesn't work. But anyway, so let me toss it over to the panelists and let them have at it. Go ahead, Dr. Henry.
Yes, I wanted to respond first to the comment and to say thank you to all the panelists and the persons who post questions or pose their thoughts in the chat as well. And first to respond to Nicole Cole in the chat with her asking about UG and the care facilities for students. And just to let you know, Nicole, that's a work in progress. There's a huge project that is on with an international agency, the Ministry of
I think you need to take off your camera.
the faculty facility that caters. Sorry?
You're
Are you hearing
breaking
me?
up, so the camera, your camera being on may be affecting your thing.
Okay, yes. And just to say too that we are looking to provide that kind of support to students. Second, the question posed in terms of what has been said is that many of the policies are gender neutral, and that is something that is of concern to all of us, because when they are gender neutral, the women lose, and that's not what we want. We want to be very intentional in every activity as it concerns women, because we know that women need additional support. The other question about having women at the decision-making table is important. It's important to sit at that table, but when you sit at the table, you have to speak. And so I think it's very important that we start training up a cadre of women who can speak, because many times we get an opportunity to sit. And I recall years ago doing some research work, and a woman was asked about her role in a particular fora, and she was quite satisfied with her role in terms of making sure that the facility was well prepared. And there are still some of our women in leadership who still maintain that role. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but I'm saying that many of us don't get to be at the table. And if you are at the table, we want to hear you properly represent the issues that are out there that are affecting women. One of the things that I think that came up too was the whole notion of social protection and the benefits that women should derive from to support them in their caregiving responsibilities, whether it's child care or elder care or whatever care, because the burden of care falls on women. And I think this is something that we have to be very active on and lobby for and advocate for, because it's not going to stop. We've had this conversation going on for quite a while now, and I don't think that we have managed to address it. There is not enough. You can't go to and file your NIS claim to say that you were ill and taken care of a loved family member. And particularly if you're in a low income job, more so that you don't have no benefits. So those are challenges that I think our social protection system has to address. And we have to find ways, those of us who are at the table and who have the voice and the commissions and all of us, we've got to speak to those issues in terms of the benefits. The pandemic has brought about new opportunities, but it is also, as my colleagues on the panel mentioned, it has created a lot of disruption. Will the new opportunities be sustainable? That's a question that we need to check to see how that will be answered, because sometimes we don't have the wherewithal to sustain those new opportunities that have been crafted. And so they may need additional support. So these are all things that I think that should be addressed. And I too am really happy that this is part one of the conversation, because we cannot do the future of women and work in 1 hour, one night. We need to have a sustained conversation, and we need to probably have segments of that, and also talk to some of those women who are not here, right? As to what the issue means to them, how do they see it, what are their real stories. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. The issue of childcare is certainly a bugbear.
There is a
and,
Miss Gajdar on.
right.
with
Yeah.
her
No,
hand up.
I've seen Chabi.
Okay.
The issue of childcare is something that has engaged the attention of the Commission. We have actually made several recommendations with respect to childcare, and one of the things the Commission is using these webinars or panel discussions to do is to help us to formulate policies that we make recommendations on. So certainly, I think we will be pushing this. The other thing, I think, last time we had a discussion on social benefits and how it could be used to achieve gender equality. And one of the things is that came up, and we have made that suggestion already to Parliament, is the issue of paternity leave. But how is it that we can pay persons for, in terms of NIS, for unpaid care work? What is the formula? What is the mechanism that we can use to calculate how much a person should be paid for through NIS when they reach a pensionable age, if they've been engaged in care work in their homes. We haven't given it enough thought, but I think it's something that we need to push forward on. Chabi, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Renata. So regarding Dr. Henry's panelists, thank you for your presentations. Regarding Dr. Henry's comment about if you're sitting at a table, speak up. I have been in a position where it must have been like 20 years ago, I sat at the table because I had a team. In my team, there were 3 staff members who had children going to the same school. And so I did my own little thing, research in the office, and I suggested at the table, at the management table, that we introduce a system where the driver for the company takes these children to school so we do not lose production time in the office, right? And one of my colleagues, a male colleague, under his breath says, "Are we running a creche?" And I'm looking at the CEO and he's not responding, and they just shut me down. So I am saying that, yes, we speak, but what we need in order to cause a shift in terms of policies in the workplace is to have legislations that speak to this. Yes, and I love the concept of paternity leave because then that gives the male colleagues who are right up there at the top of the chain the opportunity, even if they stay at home on paternity leave and do not participate in childcare, at least they may have a sense of what childcare involves. And so when they're sitting at the management table, they think differently about the situations that arise from their team. So I hope that we can continue our efforts to have legislation that speaks to this kind of, to benefits to policies that benefit females. Thank you.
Thanks, Chavi. Certainly
you.
somebody brought it up. I don't remember who it was, that even if this issue of care and being able to take time off and be remunerated for care is something that we really need to explore a little bit more. I'm just thinking of the man who says, I can't come to work today because I have to look after my children. And somebody at the workplace saying, yeah, right. Because it's not something that is done. And certainly if somebody has to take time off from their career to care for parents or to care for a child who's suffering from a very serious illness, that benefits need to still be paid for that person to be able to do what they have to do. That's necessary. Dawn Rose, you're up next.
Very good evening to all. This may have been covered before, but I missed it. I wondered how the team felt on the impact of formal education versus or vis-a-vis practical skills and competencies, how that would affect the gender gap, how would it would affect equity in employment. Throughout the Caribbean, we have the traditional family-led matriarchs, families that are led by women, single women. How does the panel feel about the inequity of formal education, the opportunities for those women that are formally educated versus those who have tremendous skills and competencies without a formal education or certification?
Thank you for that. I think Dr. Henry, that's right up your alleyway.
Yeah, uh, I think both are important, but we cannot negate the local expertise, the indigenous expertise. And I've seen families grow because they have mastered the art of nurturing their indigenous expertise without having that formalized training. However, I'm also conscious of the changing dynamic in terms of technology and having some amount of literacy as it relates to technological advancement and so on. So where the informal education, because some people just don't want to, may not want to go to university or to a technical institute or any such place, but they have a skill, they have a natural gift, they're doing herbal medicine and doing a good job out of it, or they're, they're making their saltfish and whatever, and they're doing excellently out of it. But what we want for them, which did not happen in the past, I think this whole new environment is requiring us to give them, or some member of their family or somebody around in their network, some of those basic financial skills, as well as some of the technology skills, so they can use some of those platforms to advance their work. Because what we want is for them to sustain their income, and then when they get old, to benefit from the social benefits. They must also know about the how to pay their NIS and those other things that will impact them in their old age when they're not able to do this task that they have been doing. Those are my suggestions as we address this issue.
If I may as well, Dr. Glasgow did mention um, a lot of women, and possibly a lot of those women, are doing more or getting involved in more authentic work. So I believe that there's, even though some of these women might not be formally educated, there's still opportunities that are there. And I think too, in Guyana in particular, infrastructure is set up in such a way that it supports these type of women. We have organizations like the Small Business Bureau and so on that support exactly these types of persons. So, and as was previously mentioned, not everyone is interested in formal education, and also to, we can't ignore the fact that not everyone could afford it as well. But thankfully, I mean, I think that despite that being the case, there are entrepreneurial opportunities um, for persons who have skills as opposed to the formal education.
Thanks for that. Also, I think Ghana is also pursuing this what we call it, CVQ certification, so that say for instance, somebody knows how to do something, there is an exam or something that you can take to get a certification. And that then you could use to engage, say for instance, apply for a contract or something and show the requisite certifications so that you can get the job. The other thing that we have been pushing, and I see more of it, is that the Board of Industrial Training is certainly opening up its roster of courses so that a lot more persons can be trained in things that actually make money outside of cake decorating and sewing and catering, so that women can have the opportunity to be more productive and to have the opportunity and chance to make a decent living with skills and things that they may not traditionally have been afforded before. This gets back to a comment I think somebody made about regulating women and education. I don't think women are prevented from being educated or taking any form of education. A lot of it has to do with their culture that they exist in and how their peers perceive them and their community perceives them if they go into something that's non-traditional. I mean, my hero is that 70-something-year-old woman, I think, on a Equitable course who pursued a certification in auto mechanics. She was the oldest student, but she pursued, that was her thing, and she wanted to get it, and she pursued it. So there's still hope for the rest of us. Right, so we can take another round of questions. Chabi, your hand is still up. Is this a new hand?
Sorry. No. That's that's not a
And the
new
same
hand.
for Dawn. Is it a new hand or no? Okay, so yeah, I think this is a conversation that we, as Dr. Henry says, we need to have it in stages. We certainly have a lot of ground to explore. And because work is changing and because persons are getting into self-employment a lot more, persons are getting onto the gig economy, our social benefit structure has to move with the times. And we certainly have to play a role in crafting how those new dynamics occur and can occur. All right, so I don't see any hands up. So it means that nobody else wants to make a comment or a question. Oh, okay. So Melanie, is it a new hand or an old hand?
It's a new hand, sorry. So I was just going to say, I think as wonderful as it is to promote entrepreneurship and to promote self-reliance and everything, we have to still remember and focus on the need to carve out female spaces within existing institutions instead of opting out of them, in a sense. And again, I'm not looking down at anyone who does opt out of classical work structures, but the reality is that, as you commented, one of the reasons women are falling into the entrepreneurial things and starting up their own businesses because they feel that they have a greater control over their time when they own their own business. Well, damn it, for all those businesses that aren't owned by women, there still needs to be that space where women have the chance to still have a meaningful engagement at work. So prioritizing or not forgetting that still has to be part of the conclusion to this, I think is very.
Oops. Okay, Melanie, I heard you about us having or ensuring that
I'm not sure if I'm clear. I'm sorry.
It was breaking up, but let me just try to paraphrase a little. I think you said that we still need to ensure that spaces where women work are made to be comfortable, are made to be empowering, are made to be nurturing. And so there's still an insistence that whether it's through retraining or whether it's through legislation or regulation, that women can feel safe and empowered and valued when they do turn up to spaces of work, even if they are not in control of that workspace.
Correct, because everybody isn't the boss.
No, everybody, and then people need to be valued for the competencies and skills that they have. I think the comment from the guy from the hotel, who said that we probably needed regulation as to who, women and what shifts they can choose or to work on or not. And I'm thinking you could have a conversation with that woman when she comes on to say, okay, how, you may need to work a shift system, but you are free to ask for, and it can be honored that you select which shifts you would like to work on. because you have specific childcare or other needs that need to be honored or addressed. Yes, we can have regulation, but sometimes I think that that interaction and that conversation between an employer and an employee is also important and goes a long way to making a space safe for a woman. Imani?
Thanks. I actually was kind of going on that same line where I think prior to COVID, things like flexi work, which different gender advocates had been putting forward as a way in which to create a more facilitatory or inclusive and supportive work environment for women in particular, that it was really looked upon in a very negative way. Like, how do you know if work is happening? How can you track productivity, etc.? Assuming that hours at work equals productivity, which is a false assumption, as we know. But the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, opened up the world in two ways for us. One, it forced everybody to relook at how work can happen, and that it could actually happen productively. As you said in your opening remarks, right, Renata, around outcome-driven management. But also in terms of the whole thing of emotional well-being is an important factor for people to be satisfied and working productively and impacting profits. I think it could be a very good, people seem to be going back to how things were because it's almost like a default versus creating something new or a hybrid in light of what we have learned. We're talking about build back better, we're kind of building backwards. So maybe there is an opportunity to say, remember, there were some good learnings in the pandemic. There are some good insights in the pandemic, out of the pandemic. So how can we, it doesn't have to be regulation, it could just be national conversations, right? How can we configure the workplace differently such that we can recognize that our workers are human beings with various responsibilities, and that they too want to be productive and happy. And when they're happier, we have more profits, meaning the company owners, but that you can configure life differently. So maybe partnering with the chambers of commerce, with the HR managers and CEOs. I'm just thinking through, how do we take the best of some of the good things of the pandemic into the new normal, because that could be a way in which because things like policy change and laws are harder to get done, right? But having come out of a recent experience, it's easier to continue it if we're open to it. So again, almost like keeping the door open could be a focus point of the commission as well, and other supporting parties. I'm just thinking about it in that way.
Yeah, it's certainly a lot easier if companies were, for instance, to have a gender policy that they developed together with everybody in the company. And it's certainly easier for a company to say, regarding shift system, we'd like to have the women do the day shift and the men do the night shifts. This is particularly important and current for security companies. We have one commissioner who has a security company, and she says, yes, her policy is women will work during the day, the men will work during the night. And so these are little things that the persons in authority can change it, that they can make to make, to be responsive to the needs of their employees, whether it be male or female. What about that guy who has to take care of his mother who is not well, and he would like to do day shift because he has to be there at night, or he wants night shift because he has to take his mother or whoever to the hospital. But these we only know if we have conversations with our employees. This thing about workplace performance and appraisal, and I'm glad that we have HR people on the call, is something that we need to really look at in the new paradigm of work. If somebody's working from home, you have to be able to develop ways to measure how well that employee is performing. even though they're not in your face. And by the flip side also is, if that employee is not in the office, they shouldn't be forgotten about when it comes time for promotions as well, because you haven't had that interaction with them, that face-to-face interaction with them recently. All right, so floor is open again. I see Desiree Edgel here. We must really have a conversation about creative arts and the future of the work in the creative arts. And what does that look like post-COVID?
It looks like $500,000 to rent the National Cultural Center. Oh my God.
Sounds like you need to have a conversation with the decision makers.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you know, people have said that. Good night, everyone. Sorry, I just had to get that in.
Yeah.
People have been talking about the performing arts and that we need to really revive it. But then when that came out, that kind of put a little damper on things. I want to share something that happened. Minister Cheryl had a meeting. I don't know if you were on that meeting, Renata, where she invited people to be a part of a discussion about if they were putting the focus on the right places, if people had things that they wanted to focus on, and it's not being, you know, that kind of thing with civil society.
No, I wasn't at that meeting.
Okay, so it was an online thing. Yeah, it was an online thing that I was invited. And when I was there, I didn't see anyone from the arts. And so I decided that I would make a little pull for that cultural center, because what really happened is that you pay the rental, you pay if you videotape, you pay if you use the bar, you pay for the ushers, you pay for the ushers' transportation, and then they take that to 20% surcharge and 40% VAT. So 36% of your takings is taken before your expenses. And I brought it up and I asked her if there was any way of us revaluing the seats, because that 20% surcharge came about in Burnham's time when he wanted the small man to be the real man, and he wanted the tickets to be sold at $10. And he said, if anyone sold their tickets, this is 72 in them kind of times I'm talking about, Renata.
But still 20% on $10 is a lot.
Right. If you sell it over 10. He wanted it to be sold at 10. But anybody who goes, it's like to keep you 10. At the 10 so that the small man could be able to go to the National Cultural Center. And that's where that was birthed. But I mean, we need to like revalue the seats if we're going to do that, because $10 is like nothing. It can't even buy a mint, I think. And then so I brought it up, and she said she didn't know about it, but that she was going to address it. And a curious thing happened, you know. She said she was going to talk to the Minister of Culture, and she did. She sent an email. She copied the email to me, saying that he should probably talk with me to see if we can work out anything. And I was going to get other producers so we can have a meeting, but he never contacted me. Instead, what he did, I guess because I'm a woman, I don't know. Instead, he responded to her to tell her that it wasn't everybody that was charged this surcharge. It was only people who make a certain amount of money, which didn't make sense, because you're going to penalize me if I make money. And so when we had the next meeting, I was sitting there waiting to bring it up because he hadn't made contact with me. Started to explain that he said that, well, if you make over a certain amount of money, then they put this surcharge, which is not true. I mean, I do production, so I know it's not true. But I'm saying all this to say that I'm hoping that that didn't come out of that $500,000. Because if you're asking to revalue the seats, then you can't charge people $500,000 to rent. Some people don't even make $500,000 when they do a production, depending on how well it does. I guess the money does too. There are a lot of women doing producing now. And really, I would like to sustain the organization that I run through the arts, but I can't do it if that's what's going to happen, you know. So yes, I think we do street theater, we do messages through the arts, we still continue to do it with youths. We're doing vaccine hesitancy, we're using the arts to send the messages and all of that. But where the theater is concerned, it's killing the theater. And mind you, we have a national drama school. I don't know if Margaret is on this call. I saw Margaret, I don't know if it's her. But we have a national school of drama, and we have people going to be trained every year. And when they come out, where are they going? They're not going to be able to afford to put on a production.
Yeah.
So
they're going on cruise ships. But certainly
right?
we need to remember years ago we had this big discussion about the EPA thing and how we wanted to ensure that so we did ensure I think past the late Prime Minister from Barbados ensured that the creative arts was part of this discussion with the EU.
Yeah.
But then that, really hasn't paid the benefits that I guess we thought it was going to pay. Certainly artists from the Caribbean can go to Europe and they have preferential treatment, I think, in some instances. Depends on if you've ticked enough boxes. But what you're talking about really brings home the fact that we need to create a culture of giving, a framework around giving. Places like the US, the Kennedy Center is sustained by corporate giving. And so corporate giving to the arts so that people are able to put on productions. The center is able to be upkept to the standard it is because of corporate giving. And there's a whole tax framework around that. And I know the colleagues from the private sector, this is certainly a discussion to be had with the government with respect to things like this, because I'm not saying that it isn't, but the cultural center still needs to be maintained. And you need to make money, and there must be some meeting in the middle, and it tends to be funded, at least in other jurisdictions, by corporate giving. So something to consider. So Danmati, I see your hand up. You wish to speak?
Renata, if I could just quickly, just to say that
sorry.
I think that
I guess Melanie wants to go
whole thing
before
about corporate giving comes back to that point of having institutionalizing a system for rewarding positive behavior. So instead of legislating negatively, give a rebate, give a tax free. The US has a lot of corporate giving because you get tax. It's tax free. The dollars you spend on your donations, and they have a lot of programs like that.
Correct. Right.
So
that is so true. I mean, and this is some of the things that we can engage the government on things like this, because it's not only to the arts. Certainly NGOs like the one that you have, corporate CSR is an important part of the corporate structure at the moment, but it's not reinforced and it's not valued in our current tax system.
No, but the whole thing about child care, government could say to companies, look, we will give you X number of years, and within this period, if you set up a system for child care, support, a creche or whatever, we're going to give you a rebate, or we're going to give you $500,000 to do it, or something like that, and then introduce a system thereafter where it becomes legislation. So there are ways to do it.
Right. So one of the things with surrounding that is that there wasn't enough regulations or structure framework around companies having a creche. And I know the ministry, Danmati has her hand up, yes, has actually begun to put in place that framework for having early childcare centers at places of work. So they now are training persons, they give you a certificate, they can do this, etc. You must have so much space, you know, you have this equipment, that equipment. So there's now more knowledge around it. It's not as complete as it needs to be, but it's certainly progress in that direction, so that private sector companies can actually begin to look at having creches, etc., at the place of work. Then years ago, when I sat on the board at Georgetown Hospital, that was one of the conversations we'd had. We'd had actually identified space to put in a creche so that the employees of the hospital can have a place to leave their children, especially those that worked at night. It's years now, and years have passed, and it still has not been approved budget-wise. Right. So it's a work in progress, and we certainly need to advocate for it more strenuously. Dianna.
Thanks, Renata. Certainly, I'm not representing any position of the ministry. I'm on this call as me. So
I know, but every time I say something about your ministry, you have a comeback.
So when I think about the future of work, I think there's a need for a conscious, deliberate effort to look at I will use the word displacement of workers, as there is increased automation or computerization of whatever it is. And as we all know, most of the majority of the persons at that level are women, you know, clerical, semi-skilled. That I think that's a category, especially in the public service. But I do believe in private sector agencies too. The women are the ones who do typing. Now with computers, the boss does his or her typing. The boss has the WhatsApp, so the boss doesn't need somebody to answer a phone. Everybody WhatsApp everybody, you know, so there's no need to go through a secretary or a personal assistant in that kind of thing. Of course, doing some research and all that, but then those are not lower level positions either. I'm not talking about somebody with a first degree. I'm talking about somebody with high school education, did some, back in time, you do shorthand and typing, and you're the secretary, you know, that, or the typist clerk, remember those positions? And so, like I said, as we go to more automation or however that is called, then there is in time going to be displacement. Of course, we can think of, we can talk about alternative employment. We can talk about skills needed for alternative employment. We can talk about retraining. However, I think it has to be a conscious, deliberate effort on the part of a set of people. You know, I'm not putting this to one agency. It has to be like a national, not national, but I need to use a word that is not, but yeah, it has to be a central kind of operation led by a task force, or if we look at a public service, for example. So it has to be a coordinated effort with many players, whoever those are, whether it's, if it's in the public service, there's a public service ministry, there's wherever, right? Because as we think about the future of work, maybe more people are going to be out of work by some of the actions that we are taking. So that is what I wanted to share.
Thank you for that. And that's certainly something for us to consider. And that's one of the reasons we had this conversation, because the world of work is going to change, and we therefore need to start putting in place mitigating efforts or things or policies, so that we, if we don't come out ahead, we at least come out equal. Margaret, you have the floor.
Thank you, Renata, sorry. I am a little uncertain about my audio, but I hope it works. Thanks to Desiree for raising.
That's fine. Yeah, she certainly raised that issue
about women in the arts, particularly. I'm hoping that 500,000 has been muted. Well, it's just that. It's just a proposal, but it's a pity that people from the arts weren't invited at that discussion, so that we could cast some realistic, perspectives on that. But I want to move from women in the arts to women in agriculture. I did put the question in the chat. Tonight's webinar and the previous webinar, it went unanswered, so I figured that I had to put my hand up to get this addressed. I'm thinking about the young ladies, and I do have a relative who graduated from the Ghana School of Agriculture last year. What policy can we put in place or is in place to ensure that our young girls who have chosen this field that has been dominated by men is given an extra push towards, with all the chat and talk and policies and revelations and publications about agriculture now and collaborations with with islands. You know, I think it's very distressing because I personally have got involved and I'm trying to get this girl attached to some agricultural project or something or employed within the field, and it's totally distressing. From the office of the Minister of Agriculture to NARI to GSA to the Ghana Defense Force to all kinds of places. What can be done through this commission to ensure that there is some proactive approach to ensure these young graduates, females, can be employed in these projects that are being touted? I called one of those places and they said to me that that is exactly what it is. It's just been publicized. There is nothing in ink, there's nothing written, there's, you know, and what is it? Is it just media? I don't know. It's very distressing when you have a relative who has chosen this alternate field and with all that is going on. So what can be done through the commission to ensure that something happens for young girls? Thank you.
Well, let me toss this one to the chair.
Thank you, Renata. I've listened intently to the discussions. I want to express my sincere apologies to the sister who spoke just now with respect to her relative who has graduated in the field of agriculture and is unable to find something. I know it's a policy. It is something that is intended. Whether it has started, I am not sure, but I would like her to perhaps go to the Ministry of Agriculture. There's a gentleman there who is the Director General. She should talk to him. He's very amicable. I'm sure he would be willing to listen to her and to advise. At this point in time, I can't say anything more. All we can do, or I can say to you, if there are certain specific problems that any individual have, we cannot resolve it here through this forum, but I would believe that outside of here, we may be able to talk to the person if they can give us their name. To our office, Renata is our CEO. We can take that information and we can probably make some inquiries on her behalf. But as I said to you, the Director General is someone who is always willing to listen and maybe guide her in that regard. And I would like to encourage her not to lose faith. You know, in everything we seek to do, there will be challenges, but you know, you have to keep persevering. And we together, that is the commission and the individual, we can talk over the issue and make some recommendations so that it can be resolved. I have listened to Desiree and is it Margaret as well, with respect to the problem. Again, the people in the arts need to form themselves into a delegation and you come up with some recommendations that you would like to see. Those recommendations you want to get done, or you want the minister to take heed of what it is the people from the arts would like to get done. So your recommendation plus a delegation should be the way in which you should address the issue. And that, to my mind, is you have to do it on your own. You have to bring your people together and you follow with your letter. And that, to my mind, is the way to go. And we can say to you, to all of our participants that are listening, that we also in the commission, although we're a constitutional body and we are required on an annual basis to lay our reports in Parliament, we are frustrated because, you know, we would like to see some action. We'd like to see action taken on some of these issues that we would have raised from time to time. And we become frustrated, but you know, you cannot allow yourself to be frustrated. So what did we do? We have written to all the parliamentarians, we send all our recommendations to Parliament. We keep working with all the respective chairs, the speakers of the National Assembly, and to remind them, if it is something that has not been done in the past, please, you need to consider it for the future. So we can't give in to frustration, we have to act. And as I'm on the floor, let me also make the point that was made about women who sit in decision-making bodies or the seat of power. And yes, to an extent, there are some women who are content to sit down and to be, I wouldn't say a pawn, but to be silent because they're afraid to rock the boat. So, you know, in life, once you rock the boat, you will feel that you will pay the price, or you can be penalized. And so a lot of people, whether both men or women, sometimes they're prepared to you know, just let things slip by and don't say anything. You have people like that in the world. And we have to keep ensuring that wherever we are, we speak to the issue. You don't, you know, you have to be strong in what you strive to do, but you have to speak to the issues at hand. Changes don't usually happen, you know, in a very quick way. It takes a while. And I just want to bring to your attention an issue with respect to the whole question of creches. I remember when I was in the Ministry of Labor, at a meeting of the tripartite, and people who are in the private sector will know that there is that collaboration with the government, with the trade unions and the private sector in relation to any kind of changes you want to make with respect to legislations or policies. And I had really lobbied to have creches in many of the private sector places and even in government agencies. And these were knocked down by the private sector. The trade unions give lip service and nothing ever happened. So that was in 1997. That was a discussion that took place a long time ago. And I want to say to Dan Mati, when the Leadership Institute was set up, we also had identified a creche for those women who would have been coming to participate in those programs there. But then there was a change and different ministers had responsibility and that idea was shelved. So it never materialized. I hope now that you are sitting in the seat of power, chances are you'll be able to lobby for that to happen, because we need, for that institute, we need women to be able to bring their children if they want to have an opportunity to, you know, embark on some kind of empowerment program. Because really and truly, that institute was intended for women who perhaps had a burning desire, have a burning desire to educate themselves, but they could not have had a secondary education either because of poverty or whatever the circumstances may be. But that institute was supposed to be the entry point for them to get involved in that, you know, get back to study and feel good about yourself and confidence building and all these things that were intended. And later on, hopefully they can get involved in other kinds of programs. So it is something that we need, and I do support the points that have been raised. we need to have creches wherever possible. And when I refer to the Enmore martyrs, is just to show you that this was as early as 1948. But the whole idea of creches, I use the estate, but it was just the idea behind it, that it's something that you need if you want women to come out and be involved in the world of work. They need to have, they need to feel secure that when I'm at work, my child is taken care of. But it's something we have to work towards. And I don't believe in getting frustrated about these things. I believe we have to keep working at it to make those things happen. Changes do take a while. And as we're on it, I just want to remind all my sisters and brothers here, the whole question of domestic violence and sexual harassment, all these things. We have been working for so long to get changes. You put in legislations, you put so many things in place, and people still behave the way they do. And you still have all these murders taking place because changes will not happen in decades. Sometimes it takes centuries to make changes, especially the kinds when it has to do with people, cultural and social behavior. I just want to thank you. And I would say great discussion thus far. And I'm so happy that we've had more than 50 something, I think 53 persons participating in this discourse today. It is excellent. And I want to say to all of you present, our CEO, very innovative in ensuring that we can take the commission to another level. And we really appreciate all the work of our commissioners in making sure that even though sometimes we become frustrated, we still have to do what we are required to do and we are mandated to do by our constitution. Thank you, Renata.
Thanks. And folks, I know we've gone past program time, as it were, but there's a comment in the chat with respect to security guards. And it says, good night, everyone. We have an issue where our sisters in the security forces, they're underpaid, poor working conditions, long hours away from their children with little or no protection, and we must stop this madness. This is a conversation I think that security guards need to have with their employers. One of the things we had learned back in a study that was done a long time ago was guards who carried weapons got paid more. But the training for that enabled you to carry a weapon happened during the work time of most of the women who were on the service. And therefore, only the men were able to go to get training to carry weapons. And so, of course, once you carry the weapon, you got paid more. You also were entitled to move up the ranks. So they got promoted more often. I know Melanie is off the call, but this is something that should engage the owners of private security firms. I know there's a lot of private security firms that are springing up now more than ever, and therefore lots more opportunities for employment. It is good in one way and a sad reflection of our society in another that we need more and more security services. This is something that I think the Ministry of Labor needs to address with respect to the working conditions of security guards. And the suggestion is, I think, please write a letter, I guess, to the Commission to detail this. And maybe we can form a delegation to go to the Ministry of Labor to engage them on the issues, on the working conditions of security guards. This has been a bugbear for a very long time, and we still have to persevere in trying to get something done with respect to that. There was a comment also in the chat with respect to the education of women, of children, and that it needs to be mandatory that girls and boys are educated until 16. I think girls and boys have to be educated until they leave school, which is, I think you can leave school after taking CXC, which is around the age of 16. Anything before that, you're considered a dropout. we can't stop kids from dropping out of school, but we certainly, the law does not permit persons to be withheld from going to school. Even a headmistress cannot prevent a child from being in school, whether the child is in or out of uniform, with shoes or without shoes, pregnant or not. The head teachers and teachers on the whole cannot prevent a child from accessing education. It is a policy on the part of the Ministry of Education. And certainly what will have to happen is that there needs to be more work around enforcing that policy. Because no kid should be left out of school for whatever reason. So it's program time. This has been a very informative discussion, and certainly a very engaging discussion. I've learned a lot. I hope you have learned a lot. There's certainly a lot of takeaways that I would have, be able to do from this discussion. And I hope the same is for you. I recognize, I think Rowena Elliott is the head of the Women's Chamber. It's good to have you on the call. I hope that we can engage in the future. And let's see if we can make the world of work more welcoming for women. As I said, the PS from the Ministry of Labor, because they were invited to be part of this discussion, was on the call earlier, but he had to leave, it looks like, and that's disappointing. Certainly, a lot of the issues that were raised should engage the attention of the Ministry of Labor, because the world of work is changing, and I think our employment laws need to move with the times. We are increasingly becoming more digitized, and therefore processes around work are going to change. And our regulations and our laws need to move along with that, and to ensure that the aims of our laws are upheld. Certainly things around social benefits, the right to work, how much time you can work, where you work, etc., how much you're remunerated, those also all have to be considered. I thank you for your attention, for your engagement. I hope this is, we can continue to see you in the future. And certainly we're taking, we hope to have more and more engaging topics each month around the issues that affect the achievement of gender equality and the fulfillment of life for women. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you too.
Thank you very much to our presenters. I am going to have a chat with you later, but there are some things that we can probably work on together. Nadine and Anije. I'm going to get this wrong every time. I have to take my time and say this.
Actually, you got it quite right.
You see, it wasn't so bad. You guys made it. They were in full panic mode earlier today. But yeah, this issue around data, every time we have a topic here, there is always the cry for, the need for more data on how we do things, on data to inform our decisions. And I know you're well placed to ensure that becomes a thing of the past. Right, Anije?
Yes, and what I've recognized, there are so many studies that are being commissioned. What we really need is a very well-structured data repository where we could access the information. A lot of studies and the information comes through, but a lot of times they've been commissioned by private entities who are just interested in, I guess,
what they're interested in.
Yes, market penetration and so forth. And they do study these external factors to help them build out their very strategic approaches in business. But it's, I guess there's just more, legislation and regulation in regards to making sure data can be easily accessed.
Yeah. So certainly those are things that can engage us. The need for data is always, it's never ending. Things change and we can study things to the new shape. We can also simply have conversations so we improve our communication, so we actually know what each other wants in the place of work, what would make it better. And certainly we need to look at trends in employment, trends in business, so that we can tailor our educational systems to meet those future demands. But like you said, this is only part one of this conversation, and we hopefully will have part two in the not too distant future. And I hope that we can re-engage you again when that happens. Thanks so much for your presentations. Thank you for your contributions. I can't say walk good and go home because most of you should be home by now. But thank you very much for sharing this evening with us, and the Commission is thankful. And we will look into your particular issues. Margaret, please contact me in the morning. Again, the number is 2315276. Let's see what we can do for that young lady. I'm sure we have a big enough network that something can happen. And Mr. Jai Prashad, we certainly value your contributions, and we hope that you can take away some of what we have discussed and apply it to your realm of work. Again, thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Night, everybody.